Welcome to the Chai Academy, being broadcasted live out of the Chai Center. I'm Rabbi Sachs, and we are going to take a fascinating tour of an incredible, really founding father of American Judaism, and it's an interesting journey, and this fellow made an impact that was incredible. So we are, of course, as advertised, talking about Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik. Rabbi Soloveitchik was the dean of REITs. That's Rabbi Isaac Elchanan Seminary. I'm not sure what the T stands for. Talmudic seminary possibly, but it is the rabbinical part of YU. So that's the track. If you want to become a rabbi, you go to REITs. If you want to become a social worker, you go, you take different courses at YU. But you want to become a rabbi, you go to REITs, and he was the head of this department, right? He was and he wasn't just the head. I mean, he was a figurehead as well. He was born in 1903 in Belarusia, and he's actually, by the way, his name, like we always call the Lubavitcher Rebbe the Rebbe. So Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik was called the Rav. That was his term of endearment, the Rav. And he was Rabbi Joseph Ber Soloveitchik, or Yasha Ber, or the Rav. And so he was born in Belarus. His pedigree was incredible. I mean, his father was a great man. His grandfather was a great rabbi, as well. His great-grandfather, his great-great-grandfather, authors of books that they study in the yeshivas in order to become ordained. You have to know many of these books, and it's just groundbreaking books. They're all his parents, grandparents, great-grandparents. And he was born, by the way, in 1903. Interesting, the Lubavitcher Rebbe was born in 1902, and they were contemporaries. They met each other, knew each other, etc., etc. So, like most Jewish kids in Belarus, he went to yeshiva. He went to elementary school. Then he went to the high school called the Jewish high school called the gymnasium. And then his parents saw that he was just a genius. And by the way, it doesn't take a lot for him to be a genius, knowing, who his family are. And when he graduated the gymnasium, he went into it's called the Free Polish College, and he was there. He graduated with a degree in political science. He then moved on and went to Berlin. He shifted from political science, and he went to philosophy. He was an admirer of Kant, and but he studied in Berlin, and while he was studying, even though he was going for a double PhD or a double and a half PhD, he always found time to make sure to study, to Talmud, make sure to pray. He had a rigorous schedule, including in the electives, and the electives which were for him because they were Talmud, it wasn't elective. Now, in general, his family, his grandfather specifically, had developed a way of understanding Talmud, how to split hairs and how to really get through a tough piece of Talmud. Remember, Talmud is written in it's almost like code, or it's written in shorthand, and you have to figure out what the Talmud's saying, and that's why you kind of needed a mentor to student. So, and it's called the Briska method because his grandfather came from Brisk. So it's called the Briska method. Rabbi Soloveitchik practiced the Briska method, which is an extensive, in-depth analysis of the Talmud. And he did it throughout his entire life. But while he was in the college in Berlin, he received a PhD in epistemology and also in metaphysical metaphysical sciences. It's actually in Berlin. He met the Rebbe. The Rebbe was also studying in Berlin, and they had somewhat to do with each other. And it's interesting because Rabbi Soloveitchik attested to the Rebbe that every day used to go to mikveh. Right? Mikveh for a woman is mandatory, biblical. It's a Hasidic custom for men. Not everybody gets to do it. You have to, be disciplined, get up a half hour earlier. The Rebbe went every day. And then he studied in Berlin, and of course, Germany became dangerous. So he got out of Germany, and in 1932, he emigrated to Boston. And in Boston, he founded the Jewish day school, the Maimonides Day School, and he was known for his modern orthodoxy. Now, there's orthodoxy and then there's modern orthodoxy. I personally do not like these labels. Labels are they divide more than they unify. So, but labels for sake of identification, I guess we have to do it. But when somebody comes to me and they say, Rabbi, I'm a this Jew, I'm a conservative Jew, I'm a that Jew, I'm a Reconstructionist, Reform, Humanitarian, Humanist, I say, I don't understand what you're talking about. Are you Jewish? Yeah, okay, move on. So he was what they call yet another label, he founded modern orthodoxy. So what was, when he founded this school, he founded it for this day school, yeshiva. So it was for boys and girls. And he broke with the norm. The normal Orthodox way at the time was girls do not study Talmud. They studied the Bible, they studied the prophets, they studied Jewish law, they studied Jewish history. Talmud was reserved for the men, for the males, for the boys. He said, no, boys and girls, in my school, you can study Talmud together. And that was revolutionary. He was criticized by many for breaking with tradition, but he felt, and he felt that if he wasn't going to give these girls, if he wasn't going to enthuse them, and challenge them with deep understanding of Talmud, then they'll go astray and they'll study something else that's not related to Judaism. So he said he'd rather them study Talmud than study Darwinism. So that was his approach. His father was the head of the dean of RIETS, of Rabbi Isaac Elchanan Talmudic Seminary. And when his father passed away in 1941, he succeeded his father and he became the head. Now, they say that he, in his lifetime, had given ordination, smicha, to more than 2,000 rabbis. Right? So you can imagine any given year, there was 50, 75, etc., whatever it was. In his lifetime, in his 4 decades, he had given smicha to 2,000 plus rabbanim, and they became leaders in their own community. You have Rabbi Emanuel Riskin, who's now in Efrat, but he used to be the Lincoln Square rabbi. You have Rabbi Avi Weiss, who was the rabbi of the Riverdale, Hebrew Institute of Riverdale, I think it's called, and which is he founded something called Open Orthodoxy, which is yet another label. You have Rabbi Meir Kahana was a student of his, but so many. Now he was considered modern Orthodox, whereas his contemporary Rabbi Feinstein, Moshe Feinstein, who will address in an upcoming class, was considered right-wing Orthodox or just plain Orthodox. And by the way, they actually got along. They may not have agreed with everything ideology. Their ideology may have been different, but there was never, and we can learn from them, there was never personal animus. Never. And even others, Rabbi Hutner and Orthodox rabbis, they revered him. They called him Gaon, genius, even though they didn't agree with everything he did. So I think that is that is an important point here. That he may be considered modern Orthodox, off the tracks from Orthodox, but it's not as if he was on a different track. He wasn't in a different station, and so they did revere him. One of the difference why he would be called modern Orthodox as opposed to Orthodox is because he was highly, highly educated. And at the time, the Orthodox felt that he was, that anybody that went to college or went to university, by definition, is more secular and definitely more irreligious. So they frowned on anybody that went to college, university. He was a highly educated man, a PhD, Rabbi Doctor Joseph Soloveitchik. So they viewed him as, okay, he's not Orthodox, he's modern Orthodox. That was one of the reasons, and the second reason, which he got a lot of pushback, is that in YU, in Yeshiva University, where he led the Ritz and he had tremendous influence with the chancellors, etc. He pushed for a rigorous secular education as much as he pushed for a rigorous Jewish education, Talmud, etc. He pushed heavily. He wanted an integration, and it's probably for the same reasons, because he felt that the way to proper conduct is Torah Umada, Torah knowledge, Torah, Umada knowledge, secular knowledge, how they can complement each other, how a person's Torah can be enhanced, how a person run their life with Torah, how their Mada can be enhanced, and he integrated it, and he was highly criticized. You can't have both. It's impossible to have both. You're either or. As most of the Hasidic yeshivas, they don't push rigorous secular education. Some of them don't even push secular education at all. But he did, and he had this model called Torah Omada, Torah and knowledge, and he felt you could be a better doctor if you know Torah, and he says, and you can be a better Torah scholar because you can be more broad if you're a doctor, etc., etc. Another reason why he was criticized and they called him modern Orthodox was because of his stand on Zionism. So he was a Zionist, whereas Agudat Yisrael, which was the Orthodox, rabbinical, they still exist. I'm a member of it actually, but the Agudat Yisrael was the Orthodox rabbi, the pretty powerful organization. He belonged for a while also to the Agudat Yisrael, but and Agudat Yisrael, what they do is they cooperate with the Israeli government, but refuse to attach any religious significance. Right? Okay, so it's a secular state. There's nothing religious about it, and while it's run by the secularists, it is what it is. And that was pretty much the Orthodox stand. That, however, Rabbi Soloveitchik, he identified with the Mizrahi. Mizrahi are Orthodox Zionists. We actually had a class on Rabbi Abraham Kook, the first chief rabbi of Israel, and there I talk about Orthodoxy and Zionism. So if you want to know more, you can look at that class. And so he was okay with being Orthodox and Zionist, and he felt it was compatible. And so he was lover of the land and Orthodox at the same time. He actually, there's a very famous quote attributed to him, and it goes something like this. He says, "It's better to live in a Jewish state of Israel under a secular government than to be a religious Jew living in Brooklyn," which is a very interesting take. Very interesting take. I don't know if I 100% agree with him. I understand what he's saying, is that the very idea of living in Israel is a spiritual experience, and it's so much easier to be a Jew in Israel. You know, you go to the store. You know, it's easy to buy kosher. It's easy to keep Shabbat. It's easy, etc., etc. So once again, he says it's better to live in Israel, in a Jewish state under secular government, than to be a religious Jew living in Brooklyn. Like his father, grandfather, great-grandfather, he didn't publish anything in his lifetime. It was only published posthumously. One of his most famous books was called The Halachic Man. Halacha means law, the Halachic Man. And essentially, what the Halachic Man was, he was trying to identify what is the role, this is part of the book, what is the role of a rabbi? And he said it is less ritualistic, it's less about religion, and it's more about helping the widows, standing up for the oppressed, and making sure proper judgment is dished out. So that was that, you know. But he wrote. I mean, there's so many books. He was such a prolific author, orator, etc., etc. Here's a very interesting part of him to talk about his dedication. So as we said, in 1932, he moved to Boston. He never left Boston, ever. He died in Boston. But he was the dean, he was the Rav, he was the head, the chair of the Reeds, and he was an important figurehead in the whole YU movement. He used to commute for over 4 decades, close to 5 decades. He used to commute from Boston to New York. While he was in New York, he used to give 3 lectures at the university that sometimes could be 2, 3, 4 hours long. Once again, on how to split hairs in the Talmud, how to study, how to sharpen one's mind. And so he gave 2 to 3 university classes, 3 university classes. Then he gave 1 to 2 community, open to the community, in I believe Washington Heights, where YU is. And then he used to give a few classes when he got back to Boston after spending 3 days in New York, in YU. So this is a man who even at old age, in fact, they say that when his wife died, he added classes because now he didn't have to take care of her. He was, there was one less thing for him to do. He wanted to be home with his wife. Here, she passed, so he gave him more classes. This is a man that taught intense study, 20 to 25 hours any given week. He was teaching oral classes. It's in addition to his writing, in addition to his praying, going to synagogue, in addition to his traveling to New York back and forth, and it's also in addition to he spoke other places. I mean, he used to he was on the speaker circuit. He used to speak. It's interesting when they say when he was asked, he was considered a man who you asked tough Jewish questions, halachic questions, and he used to have a rule. If he gave a response that he felt was a little liberal, but he was comfortable, a little open, off the beaten path, a little progressive or whatever it was, but still in other words, he was skating the line, skirting the line. He used to ask that should not be publicized because he didn't want to get flack. Everybody knew him as a as a modern Orthodox, but so some of the things he kept under under wraps. But he wasn't only liberal, open, progressive, modern, whatever term you want to use. Once again, these are all labels and they drive me crazy. He was asked a question. He was asked a question as follows. To me, I mean, the question was unbelievable. The question was, Rosh Hashanah is coming. The only shul I can go to, the only synagogue I can go to, is a non-Orthodox synagogue. Should I go to the non-Orthodox synagogue and hear shofar? And he took a very, very hard line. Very hard line. And he said, no, pray at home. That was his, and I've heard of others. It was one year, I believe, it was in the Jewish Week. A bunch of rabbis took out an ad. He took a very hard line, and he explained his hard line. He explained it. He says that to take down the divider between men and women, he felt was a biblical infraction. So the question is the mechitza. Is it biblical or is it rabbinical? Now, either way, we do it, right? We keep a lot of rabbinical stuff, and of course, biblical stuff. He felt that a mechitza divider was such a strong law that he was furious when they tore it down. He was less furious about other things, but he was furious about this. And there's a lot of writing on this mechitza. There's a book. It's called The Case for the Mechitza, and it's written by the same woman who was sued by a professor in England about the Holocaust. They made a movie about it where she was sued for libel. Her name is Susan. Her name escapes you now. Livak, something like that. Anyway, so she wrote a book about her father's court case against a synagogue that took down the mechitza. Just a fascinating case. The book is probably 600 pages. Just for your own study. It's a fascinating. But so he did take some very, very strong positions. This was one of them, as an example. But when he felt he didn't have to take, he could give a little bit of slack, he did, much to the chagrin of his colleagues. However, as I said earlier, he was revered. When Rabbi Feinstein we spoke about him, revered him. They met. They met for hours. He came to the Lubavitcher Rebbe a few times. Once when the Rebbe celebrated 30 years as Rebbe, they spoke for hours. Another time, he came and spoke for hours. I think when the Rebbe's mother died, maybe, and again when the Rebbe's mother-in-law died. So it was and the Rebbe really was. They had a good relationship. There was a symposium recently called the Rebbe and the Rav Symposium. Different people spoke about what their relationship was like, what their understanding of this was like from an intellectual perspective, etc. When he passed, there was a good Israel, I think, wrote an obituary, but it was a shorter obituary than normal. Instead of it being a couple of pages, it was one page. So Rabbi Moshe Feinstein's son-in-law, Rabbi Tendler, he wrote a scathing letter, to the good Israel that he felt that they didn't give Rabbi Soloveitchik enough respect. By the way, the Soloveitchiks in Boston and in Chicago, I mean, they still Soloveitchik shuls and Soloveitchik communities, etc., etc. He had a few children. He had a few children, and he had one son. The one son, I believe, is a pharmacist and or a chemist. His girls married rabbis, and the rabbis they married, they're actually, a couple of them are big into halachic responsa, contemporary halachic issues, in the medical field, and with things like that. He, as I said earlier, he inspired a lot of great leaders. Some of them moved to the left of him, but Rabbi Avi Weiss, he was the first rabbi to have an Orthodox rabbi to ordain a woman. So that moved left. Not in his day, that was never done. So Rabbi Avi Weiss. But if you think of Rabbi Shlomo Riskin, he's now in Efrat, in one of the largest cities in Israel, and he's the chief rabbi. He's just a powerhouse of an individual. Yeshivas and shuls and et cetera, et cetera. For such a sharp mind and such a energetic person, he was struck with Parkinson's, and that eventually his body gave out. May his neshama be remembered for good. May his teachings be remembered for good. I highly recommend his book, The Halachic Man, but there are so many others. You can Google him or Amazon, and you'll see just a plethora of books. God bless. Please feel free to share the Chai Academy with others. There's about 250 classes out there, different subjects, myriad of different subjects, and we will, please God, reconvene again. Stay posted.